Oregon football is red hot on the recruiting trail, and we got another recruiting-focused episode for you guys. We're talking Oregon Recruiting Hour on today's episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast, your premier podcast for all things Oregon football and recruiting. It is Friday, November 3rd, 2023. And just in case you're new here, I'm your host, Max Torres. Excited to have you guys along for another episode. Today we have the Oregon Recruiting Hour. It's not going to be an hour long. I got a lot of things going on, preparing to catch a flight up to the beautiful state of Oregon. I'm going to be in Eugene this weekend for Oregon versus Cal, and then I'll be staying for Oregon versus SC the following week. So super excited to be back to Eugene, missing it like crazy. But yeah, we got some stuff to get into in today's episode of the podcast. A couple of big interviews that I was able to get this week. So super stoked on those. I mean, the Ducks are really flying high right now after landing Elijah Rushing on Monday. And then I expect next week for USC to be a very, very big recruiting weekend, especially with some of those top 2024 targets still on the board. However you guys are tuned into us, whether it's on podcasting platform or on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, do me a favor, like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're tuned in to today's episode of the show. We are on the road to 3K. That is the goal right now, and the support that I have seen from you guys has been phenomenal. So just had to get that out there. Let's hop into our first section, our first topic of the day. We're talking Elijah Rushing because this is a really big difference maker type of recruit that Dan Lanning and Tosh Lapoy, the rest of the Oregon staff, were able to get into the fold. Got some highlights up on the screen for those of you guys that are listening to us. We do have the video experience as well if you want to check us out on YouTube. But yeah, Elijah Rushing, I mean, you don't need me to tell you how huge of a recruit this was, but got some good quotes from him that I think are interesting to get into. First one I kind of started off the interview with was asking him about why he committed to Oregon. And he said, quote, "After opening the recruitment, just assessing everything, Oregon just made sense for me. Just the defensive expertise with Coach Lapoy and Coach Lanning, both defensive minds and the fire that you see when you watch them, as far as I got to see from just watching it at home. You saw Coach Lanning. He was in there getting his defense fired up to get in there on fourth down. Just hearing them talk to me about the mindset prior to going into it and then kind of just seeing it coming to fruition, it was just something that it just kind of made sense for me once I started to open the recruitment and look everywhere." So yeah, that expertise and the mindset coming to fruition, that was one of the things that really stuck out to me that I heard from Rushing, because the way I look at it, Oregon is talking the talk, right? When it comes to selling these guys on the future of the program, what they're going to be able to do if they come to Oregon under this tremendous coaching staff. But what I took away from that, Oregon's walking the walk. They're doing everything that they're saying they're going to do as far as an on-field standpoint. You look at Oregon as a team, this is probably the most complete team that Oregon has had since the 2014 year when they went to the national championship with Marcus Mariota, Heisman Trophy winner. But this defense is probably better than that year's defense with that had DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead, guys like that. This defense has so much depth in that two deep, and you're getting contributions from all over the field. I think it's something that you can say. So I like to hear that from Rushing, just as far as Oregon really kind of following through on what they're saying that they're going to do. And then the other cool quote that I got was just asking them kind of what the plan was for him once he got to Eugene. How is he going to fit in that defense? Keep in mind, this is a guy, he's in his senior season at South Point Catholic out there in Arizona. He's entering his final game of the regular season tonight. I don't know what their mascot is, unfortunately, but his team is 8-1. And the plan for him, as far as kind of how they see him in this defense, 6'6", 249 pounds. They kind of see him as a Myles Garrett type player. And that is ultimately a guy that Tosh Lapoy himself has coached during his days with the Browns. And he is widely considered one of, if not the best pass rusher in the National Football League. So you're seeing the resume and the pedigree from these coaches really come into play here. And I feel like I've heard about it more in the 2024 recruiting cycle, covering the Ducks on the recruiting trail, than I have in previous years, just as far as Oregon coached these guys, or they had coaches that are now in Eugene that did coach these guys at different spots. And they're able to point to it and say, I had a hand in developing him and getting him to where he's at. And I have another recruit that basically told me the same type of a deal that we're going to talk about later on in the show. But for Elijah Rushing, if they can, get him to be Myles Garrett, kind of transform him into Myles Garrett, I bet Duck fans will be super happy with that. Another reason I think that Elijah Rushing's commitment is so important is because of the guys that you're losing along the defensive front. You could be looking at a two deep that consists of Mateo Uiagalelei, Blake Purchase, Tatum Tuioti, possibly even Jordan Birch if he chooses to come back in 2024, and Elijah Rushing. So that's just as good as the Oregon defense is right now. I'm not saying it's going to be better next year, but just the talent, the caliber of talent that this coaching staff is bringing in, it's borderline something that we've never seen at Oregon. They have the number 6 class in the country right now, and that would be the best in program history, I think. The 2019 class, I think was either 6th or 7th. I can't remember, but we know that top 5 is that mark that Dan Lanning's going for, and that they need to get to if they want to regularly be in this college football playoff conversation. And then what's even better on top of that, not only are you recruiting the prep rankings at a high level, you have a good track record in the transfer portal. You're not bringing dudes in hoping that they can do something for you. You're bringing guys in and they are playing big roles for you. If they're not starters, they're key rotational pieces. Looking at these past couple of years, Christian Gonzalez, plug and play, first round draft pick. That was the best transfer experience you could possibly ask for if you were Oregon. And then now you have Jordan Birch, who is playing a big role. He's a plug and play starter, right? And maybe a little bit of a different situation is a guy like Nico Reed, who isn't necessarily fully entrenched as a starter, but Kyrie Jackson gets hurt. I mean, that's another guy who comes in as basically a plug and play, right? But Nico Reed comes in, and then Kyrie Jackson gets a little bit banged up. Jaleel Florence has to miss some time, and you're able to lean on your depth, lean on other guys that have played some quality football that are experienced because you brought them in from the portal. So their success in the transfer portal, their quote unquote hit rate, is really part of what is helping Oregon create separation from the rest of the Pac-12 because of that depth. That's every time I watch this team, that's just something that I come back to, because you have guys making plays, not just as your starters, but guys that come in as rotational pieces. So that is huge, and there's tremendous value in that. And then Justin Jacobs looks like he's really trying to kind of hit in stride here after missing most of the first half of the season. And man, they're going to need him. You got 3 of the next 4 games at home for Oregon, Cal, USC, then you hit the road to Tempe, and then you're back at home for Oregon State. But just, yeah, with Elijah Rushing, this is just really a huge commitment for Oregon. And I know that this was one that they've been working at for a really long time, and they weren't going to give up once he committed to Arizona. When he committed to Arizona, I was not convinced that it was going to stick, and I knew this staff was going to keep on him. And then I also put out a quote. I guess this was kind of similar to the why he committed to Oregon, but I asked Elijah Rushing, what makes Oregon different from all the schools that you've gotten to check out? I mean, this is a guy who's been to the likes of Tennessee, Notre Dame, Florida, just everywhere. And this is what he said. He said, quote, like I was saying, just the defensive expertise that you have, Coach Lanning and Coach Lapoy, you kind of just got to see it like when they played Utah. That's not a team who usually gets shut out or held to that little points, but they went ahead and did that. You see the fire in Coach Lanning and Coach Lapoy, just them on the sideline, them in the game. It's just something that any defensive player would want. It just gravitates towards. When Dan Lanning got hired and then subsequently hired Tosh Lapoy, I really had a good feeling that big things were in store for Oregon on the recruiting trail. We already knew that Dan Lanning was a great recruiter from his time at Georgia. I mean, look at all the guys that he had a hand in landing with the Bulldogs and then winning a national championship. But so he was huge, absolutely huge. I think he was also lauded for his ability to close in big time defensive recruitments. So that brings additional value. And then you look at Tosh Lapoy, he even said it in one of the recent podcasts that he was on. I can't remember the guy's name, so I'm kicking myself for that. But in that recent podcast that he was on, he said that he had multiple opportunities to come to Oregon before he came to Oregon. We know he coached at Alabama, Washington, Cal, and just through all of his stops, he had solidified himself and grown this reputation of being one of the truly elite recruiters in college football. And then he comes to Oregon. I feel like he comes to Oregon at just the right time. Teaming him up with Dan Lanning and the rest of this defensive staff, Demetrius Martin, 247 Sports Pac-12 Recruiter of the Year for the 2023 cycle. This is a heavyweight staff for recruiting. You don't need me to tell you that. But teaming Dan Lanning and Tosh Lapoy up is absolutely huge, and Oregon's reaping the benefits on the recruiting trail. We just talked about it with rushing. I know it was a similar deal with Aiden Breland. None of these recruitments are just one coach at Oregon is recruiting me. And I know for a fact that is not the case at a lot of schools that Oregon is going against when it comes to recruiting. You don't see head coaches taking the same level of involvement that Dan Lanning is. Not necessarily with every recruit. I'm not saying Dan Lanning's doing that with every single recruit. But these blue chippers, these truly elite All-American talents that they're bringing on the defensive side of the ball, you can bet that Dan Lanning has a hand in that. Rushing also told me that he is trying to enroll early around that December-January timeline, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him getting back up to Eugene soon. But those were some of my top little takeaways from my interview with Elijah Rushing. You can go ahead and head on over to Ducks Digest for the full write-up where Elijah talks about his recent commitment to Oregon, ducksdigest.com, where you can find that one. How about an uncommitted recruit? Let's not just talk about the guys that are committed. Let's talk about some of these guys that Oregon is still going after in the 2024 class, which ranks 6th nationally. Roger Salopaga is a wide receiver, tight end, hybrid kind of guy from Orem, Utah, where the Ducks signed Noah Sewell, an All-American linebacker in the 2020 class. And the big update on Roger Salopaga, we got a couple of them. He's going to be in Eugene next weekend for his official visit to Oregon when the Ducks take on the USC Trojans. That's a huge game, probably Oregon's biggest home game still on the schedule, except for Oregon State, but that should be a fun one. Dan Lanning versus Lincoln Riley. So many storylines there. So he's going to be back on campus. That's huge. And then he was also on campus for the Colorado game, an unofficial visit in September. He's been to Oregon at this point, 4 or 5 times, whatever it is. So Oregon is in a really good spot here. I have him predicted to Oregon, and after my most recent interview with him, I'm still feeling good about that pick. But there are some other schools that are in contention here. Auburn is in contention. He's going to be taking an official visit out there in the near future. That's kind of an upcoming trip he has for the Iron Bowl, Auburn versus Bama. I'm pretty sure that's at Auburn. Let me double check. Okay, yeah, it's at Auburn. That makes sense. Just needed to double check. So he's going to go check out Auburn for the Iron Bowl. And then he's also going to hit the road, be wheels up to Rocky Top. Tennessee takes on Georgia. Let me see when that game is. Might actually be this weekend. I'm not sure. November 18th, he'll be at Tennessee for Tennessee versus Georgia. And then he'll be at Oregon for the SC game. So that's kind of what the rest of his month is looking like right now. He was actually in Salt Lake City for an official visit to Utah last weekend. But who else was in Salt Lake City? Oh, yeah, the Ducks. And the Ducks absolutely manhandled Utah, which was injury-ridden. I'm not trying to take anything away from the Utes. They're a tremendous program and the best. They have the best coach in the Pac-12 in Kyle Whittingham. But I think that Oregon's head-to-head results against Utah on the recruiting trail certainly helps them, right? If you can beat your recruiting opponent on the field, that's only going to help your chances. But I mean, I wouldn't put too much stock into that. I don't think recruits go anywhere just because one team beats another. But hey, a win's a win. And then Roger Salopaga is also one of Oregon's top remaining pass catchers or just offensive targets still on the board right now. the Ducks have 24 verbal commitments right now, and spots are getting tight. So if they're going to take a commitment from guys, it has to be someone that they really want. And if you're bringing in a guy for an official visit, it's got to be somebody that you feel like you have a good to strong chance at landing. And I think that's very much the case with Roger Salopaga. He told me that Utah visit just kind of showed him again, why he likes Utah so much. That's obviously the in-state school. You could talk about BYU too, but Utah is definitely on a much stronger trajectory than BYU is right now, and I think has more history. But Roger's a big-time talent. The Ducks want him. The Ducks want him bad. He is, I think, 6'5", 215 is kind of what he's looking like. So that's why you see some of the hybrid tight end receiver discussions. But the other notable update that we got from Roger Salopaga is he is going to be announcing his college commitment on December 1st. So this is a very pivotal time in his recruitment. He does have a top 10 list out right now. Let me see if I can pull that one up just to let you guys know what kind of other schools they are looking at. He is looking at, excuse me. So he has a top 10 of Oregon, Utah, Washington, Tennessee, Baylor, Miami, Iowa, UCLA, Alabama, and Auburn. Colorado also offered him, but really, if I had to guess, this is a recruitment that is down to 4. Those 4 schools that I've talked about: Oregon, Utah, Tennessee, and Auburn. Last time I reported on Roger, last time I kind of had some intel on Salopaga, it was really looking like an Oregon versus Auburn battle. But certainly with the success that Utah has had this year, getting him back on campus, that is notable. But Oregon's going to get him at a good time when they can really have a statement win over USC and just kind of try to show him like, hey, we're the big team out west that is going to the Big Ten. I know that Roger is an offensive guy, and really the headline that a lot of people are going to be watching in that game is going to be Oregon's defense versus USC and Caleb Williams' offense. But that's an opportunity to make a statement for sure. So Oregon already has some talented pass catchers in the fold for 24. You have Jordan Anderson and Dylan Gresham. You have Jack Ressler and AJ Pugliano. That's the wide receiver and tight end haul. But I think they want to add another tight end. They're still trying to kind of recruit Jeremiah McClellan, the Ohio State wide receiver in the 24 class, as well as Gatlin Bear out of the state of Idaho. He's committed to Boise State, but he's going to be taking a mission and isn't going to be playing his college football until 2026. So that's definitely a future down the road recruitment that the Ducks are still involved in, with Junior Adams and Joe Laura going out to the state of Idaho to see him in person, go to one of his games. I think that's notable, but I still like Oregon's chances here with Roger Salopaga, because we know that Dan Lanning has been very high on talent coming out of the state of Utah, and you see guys from the state of Utah making a strong impact on this year's team, whether it's Jackson Powers Johnson, who honestly might be the best center in the country. I think he is very heavily involved in that conversation. I mean, a top 5 center in college football at the very least in his first full year as a center. So that's huge. And then you also have Jeffrey Bassa, who's one of the best linebackers on this team, one of the best linebackers in the Pac-12. So guys from Utah are doing their thing for sure on this squad. And Oregon has shown that they aren't shy about showcasing young talent early. A lot of true freshmen playing this year. So given Oregon's ties into the state of Utah and the way that this coaching staff has built some strong connections with Roger Salopaga, I think that Oregon probably needs to be viewed as the favorite right now, but you have about a month and a lot can happen in a month. So my predictions in for Oregon for Roger Salopaga, as are a couple other recruiting analysts. I think that some of the 247 guys have him going to Oregon. So we got to see how that one ultimately pans out. Last guy I'm going to talk about on today's episode of the Recruiting Hour. Reminder, make sure you guys smash that like button for me and subscribe to the channel. Only takes a second, and greatly appreciate your support. Helps me out. I'm putting in all this time doing all these interviews and stuff, so greatly appreciate you guys. Let's talk about Sione Laua. He is a 2024 cornerback out of the junior college ranks, College of San Mateo in Northern California. And he committed to Oregon last month. So it's been almost a month since Sione has been committed to Oregon. was the number one junior college prospect in the country. I want to say those rankings got updated, and then he got a bump in rating, but actually got downgraded to the number 3 player. So not a huge deal, but this is a really, really special talent at corner. And honestly, I don't think I talked about this on my latest radio hit with Fox Sports Eugene. I don't think enough people realize how big of a commitment this was for Oregon to get Sione Laua, who had offers from across the country. You have 2 really good high school corners, Ife Obadegwu out of St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, Maryland, and Dakota Fields out of Gardena, California, Junipero Serra. Those guys are both blue chip corners, but after seeing both of those guys in person, I don't find myself leaning towards, oh, those guys are going to play early as true freshmen. I just think they need more coaching, and they're not necessarily there yet where they're undeniable talents that are going to see the field right away. I think Oregon's going to be, they are, working on developing their true freshman corners, those 2023 guys, Dalen Austin, Roderick Pleasant, Solomon Davis, Colin Gill, guys like that. But Sione Laua, he's got 3 years of eligibility to play 2 seasons. So he has a redshirt year if he wants to use it. 6'4", 180 pounds. And if Kyrie Jackson goes to the NFL, I'm not saying that's the case right now, but if he continues having a strong season, we could be looking at Kyrie Jackson playing himself into that NFL draft conversation. And what are you going to need then? You're going to need another experienced corner to come in. And Sione's 6'4", 180 pounds, and he's played a lot of football, albeit at the junior college level. But everyone took notice of that. You don't find guys that are as big as he is and can cover like he can move like he can. It's a rare combination. So I say all of that to say that Sione Laua could find himself playing a significant role on Oregon's defense next year, just depending on what that movement looks like, where the Ducks need to get some production from. Because Jaleel Florence, he came in and played right away, but it was a little bit of a smaller role. And then now he's shining as a true sophomore. So he's kind of the best young corner on Oregon's team right now. And he didn't even really kind of get into that starting role until his second year. So that's why I think Laua is just a little bit more likely to play than Dakota Fields or Ife Obadegwu if we're looking into 2024. But I also wanted to talk about Laua because I got to talk to him. I got to interview him earlier this week, and he confirmed something that was pretty cool. Leading up to this commitment, you guys, I had my prediction on Oregon, but there was some intel I was getting about a school outside of his final 3 making a late push. And Sione's top 3 was Oregon, USC, and Miami. But the school that ultimately Oregon had to hold off here to get his commitment was Penn State. Penn State was the number 2 school for Sione Laua, which was really interesting because they weren't in his final 3. They were, I think, in his top 5. And they are one of the better recruiting programs in college football. So really, really good interview. I haven't written it up yet. It'll be on Ducks Digest, but really good interview just from Sione talking about how he saw the development and the plan for him at Oregon, sending a guy like Christian Gonzalez, who's a longer, rangier DB, to the NFL. That played a role in terms of just helping Oregon's case. And then look at the roster now. You have longer, rangier defensive backs that are on the defense and making a big impact. Kyrie Jackson, Jaleel Florence, Triquez Bridges. So the development factor was huge. Demetrius Martin is probably the best cornerbacks coach on the West Coast. So that was huge. And then he also told me about how during his official visit, mind you, he didn't really kind of hold Oregon in the highest regard going into that visit. That's not to say he didn't like Oregon, but when I talked to him after that official visit, he said that he had low expectations for Oregon. It was just kind of the flashy school, the Nike school. But when he got on campus, Tosh Lupoi and Dan Lanning didn't really leave his side, is what he was telling me. So that's huge, just showing you, the fan, how huge of a priority Sione Laua was to Oregon. Really good corners are hard to come by. Really good edge rushers, hard to come by. That's why I think you see Oregon placing such a premium on both of those positions, especially because they do have some veterans in the secondary, and we don't really know what this roster is going to look like next year. So I think if there's a chance that these guys want to come and they're going to compete, I think you take them. And I feel like that's the deal here with Sione. That's a really strong talent and a guy that could see the field sooner rather than later for Oregon. So that's a guy I'm super excited about. I mean, big tip of the cap to Oregon and the recruiting staff for getting that one done. It looks like he's going to be enrolling around the early timeline, December, January, is what he was telling me. So it's just so great for Oregon to not only land these guys, but get them to college fast. Get them on campus. Get them with the team. Get them going through the weight program. Get their nose in the playbook so they can start learning and start making an impact. And then getting them in time for spring ball. I think that is absolutely huge. I think Dan Lanning talked about it almost kind of functioning as an additional season. Like it has that kind of a value getting on campus early for spring ball. And it's something that's tough too, because if you just look at them, like these are not Sione, but like for a lot of these recruits, these are high school kids, and high school only comes around one time. It's a really special time in your life. So coaches are asking you to wrap it up early and get your college career started. And it's I feel like if I were a recruit, it'd be a tough deal because I wasn't a recruit, and high school was some of the best times of my life. Especially getting to be around my high school team and just sharing some of those big moments. I was a manager my junior senior year, so I wasn't a player. I wasn't doing anything crazy important, but just getting to kind of have a front row seat to those special memories that you're able to create. It's not easy. So that is something that we're seeing more and more of in college football, just guys getting on campus earlier, which is great for fans, great for the team, but I don't think it's easy. And, maybe we got to talk about that or just kind of acknowledge the human aspect of it. It's not an easy decision, but yeah, quick little episode for you guys. I mean, 26 minutes, it ain't too bad, but I'm heading to Eugene in just a little bit. So I wanted to make sure I got on here to give you guys a quick episode. Really trying to do 5 days a week, but I don't want to hold myself to that. I'm just trying to go as often as I can. But man, really appreciate you guys supporting the channel and supporting all of my work, whether you're watching me, listening to me, reading me. It's all incredibly appreciated. Make sure you guys lock in with me on all social media. I'm at Torres Sports on both Twitter and Instagram, at Oregon Football Max Torres on YouTube. You can read all of my work over on ducksdigest.com. But share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, with other Duck fans. Really appreciate you guys. And until next time, you've been listening to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.